It's it's hard to even know where to begin, really, with a day like today.
Yeah.
We're diving into the recent news from the Israel-Palestine conflict, specifically that devastating airstrike on the school being used as a shelter in Jabalia, Gaza.
Yeah, it's a heartbreaking situation for sure. And as we unpack these events, it's essential to remember that we're talking about real people, right? Real families caught in the middle of all this.
Absolutely. And sources are painting a very grim picture.
Yeah.
The reported numbers are difficult to even process. At least 28 Palestinians killed, 160, injured, many of them women and children.
Right.
These were people seeking safety refuge from the violence.
Yeah, and that's what makes this event so deeply troubling, right? We're seeing these starkly contrasting narratives from the Israeli military and Hamas.
Yeah.
It's like they're describing two completely different events.
Okay, so let's break down those narratives. The Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, are calling this a precise strike on an operational meeting point for Hamas. And the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, PIJ, for those unfamiliar, is another militant group operating in Gaza. The IDF even named 12 alleged militants they claim were present at the school.
And yet Hamas is completely rejecting this, calling it a blatant lie used to justify targeting civilians. They insist there was no militant presence at the school whatsoever.
It's incredibly difficult to decipher what actually happened amidst these conflicting accounts. But one thing that adds another layer to all of this is the statement from Hamas spokesperson Ismail al-Thawabta. He pointed out that the Israeli military has essentially imposed this blockade on northern Gaza for 170 days,
Hmm.
now cutting off humanitarian aid and trapping people in a truly desperate situation.
Right. And that statement, I think, compels us to kind of zoom out a little bit and look at the larger humanitarian crisis that's unfolding in Gaza. Even before this bombing, the situation was incredibly dire. Just to give you a sense, Gaza-based health authorities report over 42,438 Palestinian deaths since the start of this conflict.
Wow. It's overwhelming, and these numbers only tell a fraction of the story. I was reading a quote from a resident of Jabalia. They wanted to remain anonymous, understandably fearful of repercussions. He
Mhm.
said, "We have written our death notes, and we are not leaving Jabalia. They are blowing up houses and roads and are starving us, but we die once, and we don't lose our pride."
Wow. That quote really captures the desperation, but also this incredible resilience of the people in Gaza. To truly grasp the scale of this crisis, it's essential to look at what daily life has become for families there. The UN released a report stating that almost the entire population of Gaza is now living in poverty.
That's just staggering. Could you elaborate on how this conflict has led to such widespread poverty?
Absolutely. This past year of war has been devastating for the economy. Unemployment rates have skyrocketed, leaving people struggling to provide even the most basic necessities for their families.
And it's not just about putting food on the table, right? It's the collapse of essential services, the lack of access to health care, the psychological toll this takes on families, especially children.
Exactly. UN agencies and NGOs working on the ground are projecting that the number of people facing what they classify as catastrophic food insecurity will likely double in the coming months. And you mentioned healthcare. Think about the newborn babies in the nursery of Kamal Adwan Hospital. They're facing a humanitarian crisis on a whole other level. Fuel shortages, critical medicine shortages, a severe lack of basic medical supplies.
It's almost too much to comprehend the layers upon layers of crisis unfolding in Gaza.
Mm.
And to make matters even more volatile, there were those reports that Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, may have been killed in a separate Israeli attack.
Right. And while those reports are still unconfirmed by Hamas, the the potential death of a figure like Sinwar injects a huge amount of uncertainty into this already volatile situation.
So for you listening, it's important to clarify. We're talking about a key leader within Hamas, a group that holds significant influence in Gaza. If he is indeed gone, what might that mean for the conflict for the people of Gaza?
It's a question with no easy answers, but it certainly has analysts and world leaders watching very closely. Some believe Sinwar's death could lead to an escalation of violence, with different factions within Hamas vying for power, potentially taking a more hardline stance in the conflict.
And that's a chilling thought considering how much violence has already transpired. Are there any other potential outcomes being discussed?
Some have speculated that this could actually create an opportunity for dialogue, for a shift in the power dynamics that might make negotiations more likely. But honestly, given the current climate, that scenario feels less probable.
It feels like we're talking about a situation teetering on a knife's edge. It's overwhelming to even try to wrap your head around it. And yet we can't look away. This isn't just a geopolitical chess match. These are real lives hanging in the balance.
Absolutely. And I think that's something we need to constantly remind ourselves of, especially as we navigate these complex conversations. It's easy to get caught up in the politics, the military strategies, but at the heart of this are human beings, families, communities.
So then the question becomes, where does the international community fit into all of this? What role should outside parties be playing as this crisis continues to spiral?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there are certainly no easy answers. We've seen the U.S. issue a warning to Israel, urging them to make significant improvements to the humanitarian situation in Gaza within 30 days, even hinting at potential restrictions on military aid if that doesn't happen.
Which, on the surface, sounds like a positive step,
Hmm.
a recognition from a major player that the status quo is unacceptable. But 30 days, when you think about the urgency on the ground, the suffering people are enduring right now, it feels like an eternity.
You're right to point that out. It highlights this inherent tension in these situations, the immediate pressing need for humanitarian aid for a cessation of violence versus the often agonizingly slow pace of diplomacy, of international intervention.
Yeah, it does feel like we keep kind of circling back to this gap between what feels so urgently needed
Mm.
and the pace of any, meaningful action. It can feel disheartening, almost paralyzing,
Yeah.
even, for those of us just watching from afar.
It's understandable to feel that way. It's a lot to process, and it's easy to feel powerless when faced with, suffering on this scale.
Hmm.
But I think that's where the importance of staying informed, of having those conversations comes in.
You're right, because even just listening to this, deep dive,
Hmm.
taking it all in, it can feel heavy. But tuning it out isn't an option either.
Exactly. We can't allow ourselves to become numb to what's happening, to the human cost of this conflict. And I don't just mean the death toll. We have to remember those who've lost loved ones, those living with unimaginable trauma, the children growing up amidst this constant fear and uncertainty.
Hmm.
Their voices, their stories, they deserve to be heard as well.
Hmm. I'm struck by something you said earlier about this being about more than just politics and military strategy.
Mm.
That it's ultimately about human beings, about human dignity. It makes me think about those who are struggling to survive, those desperately seeking a path to peace, and what that must even look like from their perspective.
And that's a powerful thought to sit with, isn't it? What does peace actually mean in a context like this? It's not just the absence of war.
Right.
It's about addressing the root causes of this conflict, the systemic injustices that have fueled, decades of violence and suffering.
It feels like such a monumental task. But then again, aren't those the kinds of challenges we're called to face as a global community? If we truly aspire to create a more just and compassionate world,
Yeah.
these are the hard conversations we need to be having.
Absolutely. And I think that's an important takeaway from this deep dive. It's not enough to simply be aware of what's happening. We have a responsibility to engage with these issues, to ask ourselves difficult questions, and to advocate for solutions that prioritize human dignity and lasting peace.
You've given us a lot to think about today as we wrap up.
Yeah.
I'm left wondering, what can we hold on to, even amidst the heartbreak and the uncertainty?
I think we hold on to hope for a future where peace prevails, where children in Gaza can live without fear, where dialogue replaces violence. And I think we hold on to the belief that our actions, however small they may seem, can contribute to creating that future.
That feels like the right note to end on. Thank you for guiding us through this incredibly complex and deeply affecting issue. And to you listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this conversation has challenged you to think critically, to empathize deeply, and to carry these stories with you as we continue to navigate these challenging times.